There is a question almost everyone has felt at some point, yet very few people are comfortable saying it aloud. It tends to appear when everything around you becomes quiet, late at night, in a dark room. In one of those strange moments when the ordinary noise of life disappears and you suddenly become aware of the fact that you exist. The question is not what happens after you die. It is the question on the other side of the same mystery. What were you before you were born? Where were you? Was there somehow a you waiting to enter the world? Was your consciousness hidden somewhere, already existing but not yet attached to this particular body? Or was there simply nothing? No memories, no thoughts, no awareness, no point of view. An unimaginably long universe existed before your birth. Yet the consciousness through which you are experiencing these words apparently was nowhere within it. And if you allow yourself to remain with that thought, instead of quickly escaping from it, something uncomfortable happens. You feel a kind of philosophical vertigo, because perhaps what disturbs us about death is connected to something even older. The realization that there was once an existence in which the universe continued perfectly well without the person we call me. The stars burned, civilizations rose and disappeared, oceans moved, people loved, suffered, dreamed, and died, and you were not there to witness any of it. Or at least, the particular person you now recognize as yourself was not there. Most people close this door as soon as they open it. It is too strange. But more than 3 centuries ago, Baruch Spinoza walked directly toward this problem. His answer was not the familiar answer of traditional religion, nor was it the simple claim that you came from absolute nothingness. Instead, he questioned the assumption hidden inside the question itself. And that assumption is this: you imagine yourself as a separate thing, a tiny island of consciousness, a private self enclosed inside a body, mysteriously appearing in an enormous universe that existed before you and will continue after you. Once you accept that image, fear follows almost automatically. If you are an isolated island that suddenly appeared from nothing, then death seems like the disappearance of that island back into nothing. Your life becomes a brief interval between 2 infinities of non-existence. Nothing, then you, then nothing again. That image is terrifying because everything you value seems trapped inside the fragile boundaries of your individual form. Your memories, your name, your relationships, your experiences, your inner voice, your sense of being someone. But Spinoza asks us to consider a radically different possibility. What if you were never an island? Think of a wave. A wave rises from the ocean. For a few moments it possesses a recognizable form. It has height, direction, movement. Sunlight catches its surface. It travels across the water. Then it breaks. Its recognizable shape disappears. Now ask a strange question. What was that wave before it became a wave? It was not hiding somewhere beneath the ocean, waiting for its turn. There was no miniature wave sitting in a cosmic waiting room. But neither was it absolutely nothing. It was ocean. The water that would eventually take the temporary form of that wave already existed. The forces that allowed the wave to appear already existed. The ocean from which the wave arose already existed. The wave did not come from nothing. It emerged as a particular configuration of something larger that was already there. And for Spinoza, something similar is true of you. You are not an independent substance dropped into reality from outside. You are a mode, a finite expression of the one infinite reality Spinoza describes through the language of God or nature. Not God as a distant monarch sitting outside creation. Not nature as something merely external to you, but one infinite reality of which everything that exists is an expression. The tree outside your window, the clouds moving above you, your body, your thoughts, the stranger walking down the street, the distant star whose light began traveling toward Earth before you were born. All of these belong to the same order of existence. So when you ask, what was I before I was born? Spinoza forces you to distinguish 2 different meanings of the word times I. If by I, you mean this particular personality, this name, this biography, these memories, this body, then no, that individual configuration did not exist forever. The wave did not exist forever as that specific wave. But if you are asking about the reality from which your existence emerged, then the answer changes completely. You did not arise from absolute nothingness. The conditions of your existence belong to nature long before your birth. The matter composing your body existed in other arrangements. The causal order that produced your life stretched backward through generations, environments, biological processes, physical events, and an immeasurable chain of causes, Nothing simply arrived from nowhere, and suddenly the question begins to look different. Instead of imagining your birth as the mysterious appearance of something from nothing, you can understand it as the formation of one temporary expression within an existence that was already infinitely larger than you. The ocean took the form of a wave. Nature took the form of you. Not because the universe was waiting specifically for your personality. Not because an invisible individual self was floating somewhere before conception. But because within the endless causal order of reality, this particular configuration became possible and then actual. And once you understand this, another disturbing thought begins to weaken. Perhaps the nothing you fear before birth and after death is not really nothing. Perhaps it is simply the absence of your present form. Those are not the same thing. Before the wave appears, the ocean is not empty. After the wave disappears, the ocean does not become empty. Only the temporary boundary we called the wave is gone. This distinction matters, because much of our fear comes from confusing form with reality itself. We look at ourselves in the mirror and think, this is what I am. This face, this body, this history, this voice, these memories, and of course these things matter. They constitute the individual life you are now living. Spinoza does not ask you to pretend they are unreal, but he does ask you to stop treating the temporary form as though it were an isolated substance existing independently of everything else. You are far more dependent than your ego likes to admit. You depend on air you did not create, food produced by systems outside you, a language inherited from people who existed before you, genes transmitted through generations, ideas shaped by culture, a planet whose physical conditions make your body possible, a universe whose laws you never chose. At every level, your existence is participation. And perhaps the most unsettling illusion is not that one day you will disappear. Perhaps the deeper illusion is that you were ever completely separate in the first place. Ask yourself, if the wave understood that it was ocean, would it experience its temporary shape differently? Would it still move? Yes. Would it still rise and fall? Yes. Would its form remain temporary? Of course. But would disappearance mean what it once seemed to mean? That question leads directly into the deeper part of Spinoza's answer. Because once you stop thinking of yourself as a thing that appeared mysteriously from nothing, you must confront another assumption almost as powerful. The assumption that your existence is fundamentally trapped inside time. And this is where the argument becomes stranger. You experience yourself as a line. At one end is birth. At the other is death. Everything you call my life appears somewhere between those 2 points. Behind the first point, you imagine an immeasurable darkness. Ahead of the second, another darkness. So naturally you ask, where was I before the beginning of my line? And where will I go after the line ends? But Spinoza's philosophy introduces a completely different way of looking at existence. He distinguishes between understanding things through duration and understanding them from the perspective of eternity. And eternity, for Spinoza, does not simply mean an endless number of years. This is crucial. When many people hear the word time's eternity, they imagine time continuing forever. 1 year, 1,000 years, 1 billion years, then another billion. An infinitely long future, but that is still duration. It is still one moment following another. Spinoza's concept of eternity points towards something different, a way of understanding reality that is not defined by before and after in the ordinary sense. Consider a simple mathematical truth. Suppose you understand that 2 plus 2 equals 4. You might discover that truth at a particular moment in your life, but the truth itself did not begin existing at the moment you understood it. It was not born inside your head. And when you stop thinking about it, it does not die. Its validity does not depend upon your biography. It belongs to an order of intelligibility that is not measured by your personal clock. Spinoza believed that when the mind understands reality through reason, when it grasps things through their necessary relations rather than merely through passing impressions, it participates, in a sense, in this eternal perspective. This does not mean that your biography existed eternally. Your childhood memories are not outside time. Your personality is not outside time. The individual story you call my life unfolds through duration. But the more deeply the mind understands the necessary order of reality, the less completely it sees itself as a frightened fragment being swept toward extinction. Imagine looking at a painting from 1 centimeter away. From that distance you see only a patch of color, perhaps a dark patch. You might conclude that the entire painting is darkness. But when you move backward, relationships appear. The dark area belongs to a face. The face belongs to a scene. The scene belongs to a larger composition. The color did not stop being what it was. Your perspective became wider. Spinoza tries to perform something similar with human existence. From inside your biography, everything revolves around events, happening times to you. I was born. I succeeded. I failed. I was loved. I was rejected. I grew older. I willed thee. The self stands at the center and measures reality according to whether things preserve or threaten it. But from the perspective of nature, your life belongs to an immeasurable network of causes. Your birth was not reality beginning. Your death will not be reality ending. This seems obvious intellectually. Emotionally, however, almost no one lives as though they truly understand it. The ego quietly behaves as if existence itself begins each morning when it opens its eyes. And because of that, death appears not merely as the loss of one finite form, but as though reality itself were being taken away. This is why the question, "Where was I before birth?" can be misleading. It assumes that the deepest truth about you is a little individual entity that should have occupied some location before entering the timeline. But there may never have been such a thing waiting. There was nature. There was reality. There was the infinite causal order. And then, within that order, your finite form emerged. It is like asking where the song was before the instrument played it. The particular sound was not already vibrating in the room. Yet the physical possibility of sound existed. The instrument existed. The laws governing vibration existed. The musician, the air, the potential arrangement of notes, all belonged to a larger reality from which the music could emerge. Then the note sounded. For a moment, the room contained that exact vibration. Then it disappeared. Would you say the note came from absolute nothing? Not exactly. Would you say the note existed forever as that note? No. Both extremes miss what actually happened. The note was a temporary expression made possible by a larger order. Your existence can be understood in the same way. And this perspective changes something psychologically important. Most human beings live with the hidden feeling that existence has been temporarily loaned to them. You receive a few decades, if you are fortunate. The clock begins. You spend your life trying to secure yourself against loss. More money, more recognition, more possessions, more status, more proof that you mattered, more people who remember your name. None of these things is inherently wrong. But notice what happens when they become attempts to defeat impermanence. You try to construct something solid enough that death cannot erase it. You want the wave to become permanent, and because it cannot, anxiety grows. Spinoza offers a harsher kind of peace. He does not promise to make the wave permanent. He changes your understanding of what the wave is. You are temporary, as this particular form. That fact does not need to be disguised. Your body changes. Your memories change. Your relationships change. Your personality changes. Even during your lifetime, the self you defend so fiercely is not motionless. The child you once were has already vanished in one sense. The face you had 20 years ago no longer exists. Opinions you once considered essential may now seem strange. Cells die and are replaced. Desires appear and fade. Life is not a fixed object, slowly approaching disappearance. It is continuous transformation. And yet, because we attach identity to a particular image of ourselves, every transformation can feel like a threat. This may be why understanding causality mattered so much to Spinoza. When you do not understand why something happens, imagination fills the gap. And imagination often fills gaps with fear. A storm becomes punishment. Misfortune becomes cosmic judgment. Death becomes a hostile force pursuing you. The unknown becomes populated with whatever your anxiety can invent. Understanding does not eliminate every painful emotion, but it changes your relationship to them. Instead of asking, "Why is reality doing this to me?" you begin asking, "What causes are operating here?" That is a radically different question. The first places you at the center of a drama. The second places you within nature. And being within nature means you are not an exception to its laws. Birth is natural. Change is natural. Decay is natural. Death is natural. The emergence of forms and the dissolution of forms belong to the same order. This is not cold nihilism. It is almost the opposite. Because nihilism says nothing matters. Because everything ends. Spinoza invites you to see that the value of a thing does not depend on its lasting forever. A melody does not become meaningless because it ends. A sunset is not worthless because night follows. A conversation does not become unreal because eventually it becomes a memory. A wave is not less magnificent because it breaks. Your temporary nature does not reduce your existence to nothing. It makes your existence a particular expression of something vastly larger. And once this begins to settle into your mind, the original question changes again. What were you before birth? Not this biography, not this personality, not this exact configuration. But neither were you an isolated nothing surrounded by nothing. The reality from which you emerged was already here. And this leads to a consequence that reaches far beyond death. Because if you are an expression of one reality rather than an isolated substance, then your relationship to every other thing must also be reconsidered, including your relationship to loneliness. There is a form of loneliness deeper than simply being physically alone. You can experience it at a crowded table, inside a marriage, among friends, walking through a city surrounded by thousands of people. It is the strange feeling that you are locked behind your own eyes, that no one can completely enter your consciousness, and that you are therefore fundamentally sealed away from reality. A private observer, a solitary point of awareness. That feeling is powerful because, from your immediate perspective, you do seem separate. You feel your pain directly but only imagine someone else's. You hear your own thoughts. You inhabit one body. The skin appears to mark the line where you end and everything else begins. But Spinoza's metaphysics refuses to treat that boundary as absolute. If everything that exists is a mode of the same infinite substance, then difference does not require complete separation. Two waves can be distinct without belonging to two different oceans. Two branches can point in opposite directions while belonging to one tree. You and another person are genuinely different finite beings. Spinoza does not erase individuality, but individuality exists inside a deeper unity. Think about what that means. The stranger you dislike, the person you love, the animal crossing a field, the tree absorbing sunlight, the planet moving around its star. None exists outside nature. None possesses an independent metaphysical territory detached from everything else. Every finite being depends on causes beyond itself. Every being affects and is affected by others. Reality is relation all the way down. Suddenly, radical isolation begins to appear less obvious. You have never taken a breath that did not depend on something beyond you. You have never spoken a sentence that did not contain words inherited from other minds. Your body itself is a history of relations. Your parents, their parents, ancestors whose names disappeared centuries ago. Food, sunlight, bacteria, water, temperature, gravity, evolution, culture, chance encounters. Entire civilizations contributed to the conditions making your present life possible. The independent self is useful for ordinary life. You need a name. You need boundaries. You need responsibility. You need to distinguish your body from another person's body. But psychologically, the image of absolute independence can become a prison, because once you imagine yourself as fundamentally separate, every loss seems like a piece of reality being permanently stolen from you. This becomes especially brutal when someone dies. The person was here, then they were not. Their chair remains empty. Their voice disappears. No philosophy can honestly pretend that this loss is unreal. Spinoza does not return the person to you. He does not promise that the exact personality you loved continues unchanged somewhere beyond your sight. That would be a different doctrine. His consolation is more difficult, and perhaps more durable. The finite form ends. The person as you encountered them, those gestures, expressions, memories, patterns belong to duration. But the reality of which that person was an expression does not collapse into metaphysical nothingness simply because that configuration ends. The wave is gone. The ocean is not. This distinction will not erase grief, nor should it. Grief is partly the recognition that a unique configuration of reality existed and mattered to us. You are not grieving nature in general. You are grieving this person, this laugh, this face, this history, this particular way the universe existed beside you. But perhaps grief becomes slightly different when you stop imagining the dead as falling through a trapdoor into absolute nothing. The form is lost. The relationship changes irrevocably. Yet the person was never created out of a void, and reality itself has not become a void after their disappearance. This was one of the original script's most intimate insights. The wave metaphor is not offered as proof of personal immortality, but as a way of questioning the terror of absolute nothingness and radical separation. And there is another consequence. If you are not fundamentally separate from nature, then perhaps your life does not need to be organized around desperate self-protection. Consider how much human behavior is driven by the desire to make the self permanent. We build reputations. We accumulate symbols of importance. We compare ourselves. We seek admiration. We fear being forgotten. We want our victories recorded. We become terrified when someone else appears more successful, because their success seems to reduce the significance of our own identity. Why? Because the small, isolated self constantly needs confirmation that it is real. It is like a flame, demanding that every other flame become dimmer so it can prove its own brightness. But if reality is not a competition between isolated substances, the logic changes. Understanding another person does not diminish you. Their existence does not steal existence from you. Their joy does not reduce the amount of reality available to you. Their intelligence does not make your mind less real. This connects directly with Spinoza's ethics. For him, freedom does not mean becoming causally independent from nature. Nothing is causally independent from nature. Freedom means increasingly acting from adequate understanding rather than being pushed blindly by forces we do not understand. Imagine someone insults you. Immediately, anger appears. You feel the urge to attack. From your perspective, it feels like pure freedom. I choose to respond. But Spinoza would ask you to look deeper. What caused the anger? Why did that particular sentence wound you? What expectation was violated? What insecurity was activated? What previous experience shaped your reaction? What desire for recognition was threatened? The more causes you understand, the less you are merely being moved by them. The same principle applies to fear of death. If you simply feel terror and obey it, you are passive before the emotion. But if you investigate the assumptions generating the terror, the fear becomes intelligible. Perhaps I fear death because I imagine myself as an independent substance. Perhaps I fear pre-birth non-existence because I assume something must either exist as my present personality or be absolute nothing. Perhaps I fear change because I confuse continuity with permanence. Perhaps I fear losing control because I secretly believe reality ought to obey my preferences. Each assumption can be examined, and examination creates space, not magical immunity from fear. Space. The difference is important. Freedom in Spinoza is not the ability to command nature. It is the ability to understand more clearly how you belong to it. When you understand a storm, you do not stop the storm, but you stop interpreting every thunderclap as a personal message from the universe. When you understand jealousy, the feeling may not disappear instantly, but you no longer need to believe everything jealousy tells you. When you understand mortality, your body does not become immortal, but death may stop appearing as an incomprehensible insult committed against you. This is why Spinoza's philosophy could be threatening to systems that depend heavily on fear and superstition. A frightened person searches desperately for certainty. Tell that person the universe is angry and they may obey whoever claims to understand the anger. Tell them their eternal fate depends entirely on submitting to a particular authority, and fear can become a political and psychological instrument. Spinoza saw how superstition feeds on uncertainty. People become vulnerable when they do not understand causes. They interpret fortune as divine approval and misfortune as divine punishment. Hope and fear alternate. Whoever claims authority over those fears gains influence over the person. But someone who begins to understand nature differently becomes harder to manipulate through cosmic terror. Not impossible to manipulate, not invulnerable, but harder. Because instead of asking, "Who can protect me from reality?" they begin asking a far more powerful question: what is reality, and how can I understand my place within it? That shift changes everything. You stop begging existence to guarantee that your temporary form will never change. You begin learning how to inhabit that form more intelligently while it lasts. And that leads to the most personal part of the argument, because philosophy becomes meaningful only when it alters the way you live on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, not merely how you think about eternity at midnight. So, return to the original question one final time. What were you before you were born? The answer depends entirely on what you mean by times you. If you mean your name, your memories, your voice, your personality, your private collection of experiences, then Spinoza gives you no reason to imagine that this particular configuration existed intact before your birth. There was no eternal version of your present biography sitting somewhere outside the universe, and his philosophy does not require us to pretend otherwise. But if by you mean the reality from which this individual form emerged, then you did not come from absolute nothing. You came from nature, from an immeasurable order of causes, from a reality that did not begin when you became conscious of it. Long before you could say I, everything required for that I belonged to existence in other forms. The wave was ocean before it became wave. Then, for a little while, the ocean acquired a boundary, a height, a direction, a shape. That shape is real. Do not make the mistake of thinking that temporary means unreal. Your life matters precisely as the life you are living. The people you love are not abstractions. Pain is not an abstraction. Responsibility is not an abstraction. You cannot escape the consequences of your actions by saying, "We are all one substance." Spinoza's philosophy is not permission to become careless. If anything, understanding interdependence makes responsibility more serious. Your actions enter the causal order. You affect other people. Their actions affect you. Hatred creates consequences. Understanding creates consequences. Fear creates consequences. Courage creates consequences. Every relationship becomes part of the network through which finite beings increase or diminish one another's capacity to live and understand. So how might you live differently if you stopped believing that you were a fragile accident floating above an abyss? Perhaps you would become less desperate to prove that you exist. You might spend less energy performing your identity for people who barely know you. You might stop treating every disagreement as an attack on your being. You might hold possessions more lightly. You might become less obsessed with whether strangers admire you. You might forgive some of the embarrassment attached to getting older. You might even become more attentive to ordinary life. This sounds paradoxical. Wouldn't thinking of yourself as part of something infinite make your finite life less important? It can produce the opposite effect. Consider the wave again. Knowing that it will return to the ocean does not make the moment when sunlight passes through it meaningless. It makes the moment extraordinary. For this brief configuration, existence can see through your eyes. For this brief configuration, matter thinks. Nature becomes aware of relationships. You can hear music. You can feel cold air against your skin. You can recognize another person's suffering. You can ask what you are. You can understand a cause that yesterday was invisible to you. You can transform an emotion through knowledge. You can love. You can lose. You can become wiser. You can be wrong, and then discover why you were wrong. All of this occurs during the temporary rising of the wave. Why spend the entire time terrified of the moment it falls? This is one of the strangest consequences of confronting death properly. You may become more alive, not in the shallow sense of chasing constant excitement. Spinoza would hardly recommend turning existence into a frantic attempt to collect experiences before time expires. That is simply another form of fear. A person running desperately from mortality is still being controlled by mortality. Greater freedom appears when you understand necessity well enough that you no longer demand the impossible from life. You stop demanding permanence from relationships that are inherently changing. You stop demanding complete control in a universe of causes extending far beyond your knowledge. You stop demanding immunity from loss. You stop demanding that your body remain untouched by time. And because you stop asking reality for what it cannot provide, you become more capable of receiving what it actually gives you. This conversation, this morning, this body as it exists today, this friend while they are here, this opportunity while it remains possible, this problem while it can still be addressed, this moment of understanding, there is a quiet gratitude that can emerge from this perspective. Not gratitude because everything that happens is pleasant. Spinoza never requires you to call suffering good. Pain is pain. Loss is loss. Human beings naturally seek what preserves and strengthens their power to exist. But gratitude can appear when you stop measuring the value of life exclusively by duration. The question is no longer, how can I make this last forever? It becomes, how clearly can I understand and inhabit what exists now? That shift is enormous. Imagine how many things you postpone because some part of you behaves as though time were unlimited. The conversation you avoid, the apology you refuse to make, the book you never begin, the person you assume will always be available, the curiosity you bury because someone might think it strange, the years spent defending an identity you no longer believe in. Mortality gives these decisions weight, but understanding your belonging to nature prevents mortality from turning that weight into panic. You do not need to live as if a void is chasing you. The universe before your birth was not nothing. Reality after your death will not be nothing. The transformation of your individual form is not the annihilation of existence itself. And perhaps this is what allows you to look directly at the darkness without inventing a comforting fantasy. Spinoza's consolation is demanding precisely because he does not say, your exact personality will remain unchanged forever. He says something philosophically stranger. You were never as independent as you imagined. You have always existed as part of a reality larger than the boundaries through which you identify yourself. That reality does not belong to you. You belong to it. Once you understand this, even the phrase "my life" begins to sound slightly different. Yes, it is your life. You are responsible for what you do with it. But it is also nature happening here. In this body, in this mind, through this perspective, for this limited duration, and that is extraordinary enough, without needing mythology added to it. So the next time the old vertigo comes, perhaps at 2 in the morning when the room is silent, and your mind suddenly asks what existed before, you do not rush to close the question. Stay with it. Ask, what exactly am I afraid was missing? My name? Certainly. My memories? Yes. My present consciousness? As this individual configuration? Yes. But was reality missing? No. Was nature empty? No. Was there absolute nothingness waiting for me? No. The ocean was already moving. And eventually, through a chain of causes no single human mind could completely trace, this wave rose. You, here, now, aware for a while that you are aware, capable of asking where you came from. And perhaps the astonishing thing is not that one day this form will disappear. Perhaps the astonishing thing is that the infinite order of nature can produce a finite being capable of understanding even a fragment of that order. You are a temporary perspective through which reality becomes intelligible to itself. Do not turn that thought into supernatural mythology. You do not need to. The natural fact is already astonishing. Matter organized itself into a nervous system. A nervous system became capable of thought. Thought became capable of examining its own causes. And now that thought asks, what was I before I was born? Spinoza's answer turns the question back on you. You were not waiting somewhere as this person. But neither did your existence explode from absolute nothing. Before the wave, there was ocean. Before your individual form, there was nature. When the wave collapses, the ocean remains. And understanding this does not erase death. It changes the meaning of the fear surrounding death. You do not need to deny your individuality. You need only stop confusing individuality with absolute separation. You do not need to deny your mortality. You need only stop confusing mortality with metaphysical nothingness. You do not need to become indifferent to life. You can become more attentive to it. Perhaps that is the real liberation. To know that this form is temporary and love it anyway. To know that people change and cherish them anyway. To know that you cannot control every cause and still act as intelligently as you can. To know that you belong to nature rather than standing outside it demanding guarantees. And to recognize that freedom does not begin when you escape necessity. Freedom begins when you understand it. So tonight, or whenever that ancient question returns, try replacing it with another one. Instead of asking, how could I suddenly exist if once I was nothing? Ask, how is it possible that this infinite reality is, for this brief moment, experiencing the world through this particular form? Look at your hands. Listen to the sounds around you. Notice the fact that there is experience happening at all. Not forever. Now, perhaps the great mystery is not that the wave will eventually fall. Perhaps the mystery is that the ocean rose into this shape in the first place. And while the wave remains above the surface, you have one extraordinary opportunity to understand, to become less governed by fear, to recognize causes more clearly, to stop defending illusions that make you smaller, to participate consciously in the reality from which you never truly stood apart. When your form finally changes, Spinoza offers no childish promise that everything personal will remain exactly as it is. His answer is more austere, and perhaps more peaceful. You came from the whole order of nature, not from an absolute void. You are sustained by that order now. And whatever happens to the temporary form, reality itself does not collapse into nothingness with you. So while the wave is here, rise, see, understand, and live without spending your entire existence terrified of the ocean from which you came. If this reflection has given language to a question you have carried silently, stay with this philosophical journey. Subscribe if you want to continue examining the fears, assumptions, and inherited beliefs that often appear to be reality simply because we have never questioned them. And leave one thought below. If you stopped seeing yourself as an isolated being, suspended between two abysses of nothingness, what would change about the way you live today? Because that may be the question Spinoza ultimately leaves us with. Not merely what you were before you were born, but what you will do now that, for this brief and astonishing moment, the wave has risen.